So this morning we're going to continue in this little January mini-series that it's around this phrase that I feel like just about as well as anything I've heard summarizes the essence or vision, purpose, message of Vine Contemplative Christian Community. This little phrase is, there's only this one thing happening. And this is part 3. It's entitled Mutual Sustained Vulnerability. So roughly 1700 years ago, Augustine of Hippo, St. Augustine, wrote, love God and then, just do whatever you want to. About 300 years before that, some religious leaders had cornered Jesus and they were asking him, what exactly is it that you teach and believe? Like, what's your organization's statement of purpose? What's going on here? Jesus replied, hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. It's this one thing happening. So learn to be one yourself. Love the Lord your God with all of your soul, with all of your mind, with all of your strength. And love your neighbor as yourself. Every religious law and moral code is accomplished in this way. Like, you don't have to worry about all the rest. Love God. Do whatever you want. What do you think about that? Ben, freedom. Yeah, those first two words are doing some heavy lifting. Love God first. Do whatever you want, and then, if you got anything left, then try to throw God a bone. if we reversed it, maybe the statement wouldn't work so well. Love your neighbor as yourself is what Jesus taught. And, we tend to subconsciously add and as much as to the phrase that isn't there. Love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. But in the plain text, there's no as much as. It's love your neighbor. Not as another person in need, or not from a place of charity or annoyance. How many times has that happened to you? You're like hustling into your house and here comes your neighbor and they're always needing something or other. You hope you can make it get the garage door closed before they see you, but you're unsuccessful. The clicker's jammed, the door won't come down, and now they're in your garage. And you're going, oh no, what are they going to want? And then you think, no, I'm a Christian. And Jesus said to love your neighbor, and so then they hit, and you just begrudgingly do for them what you don't really want to do, but you feel you have to do because of social obligations or religious pressure. You know this thing, right? And it's not the worst thing in the world. It's probably nicer, I suppose, to help than not to help. But there's kind of built into this love your neighbor as much as the way that we internalize this message, this feeling of some kind of like a hierarchy where you're too low on the totem pole, and so you're just going to get pushed around into helping. Or we can see ourselves as higher on the pole, the hierarchy. And we can think, well, from my lofty position of entitlement, I shall reach down to this poor. And it's just how we think, But Christ's central message was repent, metanoia, go beyond the mind, examine the way that you think. Pull back from the layers and the patterns and the programs. Allow for maybe the first time in our lives a genuine response to what's happening rather than just the launching of another program. Love your neighbor not as much as you love yourself, but as a continuation of your very own being. Allow this recognition that there, at the deepest level of reality, there's no you any more than there's a me. There are two cells of this one great life. There's only this one thing happening. Like behind the busyness and the chaos of this world, beneath the wonderful variety of life forms on the planet, one of the probably most healing things that's happened to me in the last year has been helping out with Spring River as a substitute teacher, particularly with the forest school, and just walking through the woods with kids. You just like, we're so divided up into all our little age groups so often that it had been a while since I'd hung out with a bunch of 6-year-olds, and learning to see the world again through their patient, observant, colorful, weird eyes. Just the simplicity of observing without needing to name or take or move or understand has been, it's like put my soul back together. But beneath even the beauty and the variety of all these life forms on the planet, down at the core of your being and mine is this one thing. The scriptures call it a mystery, and the scriptures call it Christ. We call it God. St. Paul in Colossians 3 wrote, in this way of seeing, every label that you've ever known, no matter how useful it was for a while, is now obsolete. Words like religious and irreligious, insider and outsider, moral and immoral, he says even male or female, they don't mean anything. For Christ is all and Christ is in all. This to me is the essence of what is called the good news, the gospel. And it's been bugging me for a few years, just trying to figure out how the good news for all people became bad news for most people in the way it's often communicated. And it occurred to me this week that, maybe the reason for this is because one of the immediate implications of this recognition is the dissolution of all hierarchies. There are no more power structures or systems or ways to get us all organized and thinking one thing and doing one thing and behaving a certain way. I don't know, that could sound kind of scary, couldn't it? A few years ago, I got in trouble with an old friend. He actually walked out of a service. I was teaching, and I saw him leaving in a huff, and I thought, oh no. And it was because I thought it was kind of ironic, but I had just quoted St. Paul said, those who are governed by the Spirit have no need for the law. But that statement works an awful lot like the St. Augustine one that we just used. It's actually a more rigorous and challenging criteria to be governed by the Spirit than to obey the rules and the laws. Freedom's a funny thing, what we call freedom. I tried to cobble together this quote last week, and foolishly, I've not written it down again, so I might mess it up. So if you looked it up last week, help me with it, because it's got words that keep reversing themselves. And hold on a second. I got to hydrate before I try this. I got to work with our idea of freedom. Richard Rohr says, trapped people have to do what they think that they want to do. Free people want to do what they know that they have to do. And checking in on that on the regular takes a tremendous amount of effort. It takes a lot of work to become and to remain free. And what you may find along this path of freedom is probably a lot more resistance than you expected. You know, it's like, especially the people closest to us seem the most resistant to the idea of us changing. It's a funny phenomenon, you know, it's like a little too close. It's a little too much of a shock to the system because I'm gaining a lot of security and stability in the idea of who I am based on my idea of who you are remaining stable and secure. But if you start changing, you know, it messes the whole thing up. You know, it's like get out of balance here pretty quick. It's, you know, Jesus went back to Nazareth, his hometown, the miracle worker, and there's all a buzz. People are talking about him, and he rolls into his old neighborhood, and all the folks there say, "Isn't that Joseph's kid? Isn't that carpenter's kid? Like, we know Jesus, little rascal." Miracle worker. And Jesus got so uptight, he didn't try to convince anybody of his new lofty position of Messiah. He just was like, oh, that's right. That's what happens when you come back home. And so he knocked the dirt off of his shoes and went on his way. He said, a prophet has no respect in his hometown. How many times have you felt like that going home for Christmas? Quit telling me that I'm the me I was 5 years ago. So have you ever wondered why a peaceful, nonviolent, marginal peasant teacher who communicated a message of simplicity, equality, and harmony would be met with such fierce resistance and ultimately executed in the most barbaric way imaginable by his own religious group, who would have been, you know, and we can distance him from the religious group, but these would have been like his friends and probably his former mentors, you know? Like the Pharisees weren't some rogue band that had swept in from the east to give Jesus a hard time. You know, he grew up in the synagogue. These would have been the people he learned from. The demand for Jesus' prosecution perplexed even the execution-happy Roman state, who pretty much usually just said, who are we executing? Sounds good. But they eventually complied. At their core, nearly every system of governance, whatever variety, is a collective expression of this fractured, frightened, traumatized human ego. The mind, which is a survival machine. It's been sharpened through evolutionary processes to stay alive at all costs, which fills our head, fills our body with things to do and thoughts to think, all to suppress this vague yet persistent suspicion that we probably aren't getting out of here alive. And when we mitigate that feeling through means of control, we remain willfully blind to the fact that the life, what Jesus said, the life that is truly life reveals itself only and always where? Where's the life that's truly life? It's after we surrender. And it's after we submit to some kind of death. And as much as we would like for the life that is truly life to appear and walk us through the process of death so that we don't have to be afraid and we don't have to feel it. Death precedes resurrection. It's the pattern. And it's not that we face death with no hope. There's buried deep in all, you know, hope is hard to define and understand. And some days and weeks and months and years, you can't quite figure out why you keep getting out of bed and just doing this again. And yet, something compels us forward, this hunch that on the other side of the surrender is the life that's truly life. But it's like, this guy Gary Best that used to teach around here sometimes, he'd say it's kind of like this. It's like you're at the top of a high dive and you're looking down at a swimming pool and you hear the Spirit say to you, jump. And you say, the pool's empty. And the Spirit says, jump. And you say, fill the pool with water. And the Spirit says, jump, and then I'll fill it while you're falling. And so a lot of the times then we just sort of go, yeah, I don't think so. And then we climb back down the ladder and we go and find the garden hose and we start to try to fill the pool ourselves. And that's what we do with all these laws and rules and regulations and ideas about who's in and who's out and what makes a me and what makes you a you. And it's this hidden resistance to examining what it is that makes me feel like I'm me, to looking long enough to get past all the programs and ideas. And if we're brave enough to do this for long enough, we start to see that it's all connected. That it isn't good for me unless it's also good for you, even if it's easier for me to convince myself that it's good for me and you, when it obviously isn't. St. Paul wrote, he goes, look, if you want a test, we like tests. Want to know who's in and who's out. He goes, here it is. Examine yourselves. Take a long and honest look at what you think that you believe about who you think that you are. Don't look away until you see the face of Christ reflected back to you. This is the test. Here it is. Don't look away. So this test, I think when you read the Gospels, you see that this test was being offered over and over again to everybody who met Jesus. He's the ultimate mirror. It's still this way. And the interesting thing is, it seems that those who had less invested in maintaining, he said, follow me all the time. He didn't say worship me. He said, follow me. There's a movie called, is it called Mary Magdalene? Is that the one where Joaquin Phoenix is Jesus? Yeah. Joaquin Phoenix played the Joker and Jesus in the same year. So pray for him. That seems difficult. This movie, it's called Mary Magdalene. It's really good. And seeing it, I like viscerally experienced what this follow me thing cost, This awakening and meeting this man that you know nothing about, who doesn't have anything, and a bunch of friends following him that are all arguing over what it is that he's doing. And, a pretty dysfunctional group, really. And he says, follow me. And we say, well, my dad just died. I have to bury him. And he says, let the dead bury the dead. You follow me. And it just seems the less interests we have vested in the things we think we need to be doing to maintain our idea of who it is that we think that we are. Those with the least invested in that were the ones who were able to follow him. Those with the most invested. St. Francis has this great line. He says, the place that you want to be is the edge of the inside. The closer you get to the center, the more your life becomes tasked with machine maintenance. But if you completely leave the thing, you lose your voice to see it reformed. The edge of the inside. So the guys closest to the inside seemed to have the most difficult time with Jesus. And the Pharisees, the religious leaders, keep attempting to turn the tables on him to administer, their own series of tests. And they're like, oh, you got a test? I got a test for you. I'll take your test after you take my test. Trying to keep some kind of fill the pool up before I jump. And they're not the bad guys for doing this. Their methods aren't novel or interesting or unique. They're a part of us. We do it all the time too. How have you responded to having your sense of self, your beliefs, your values sort of challenged or obliterated in your sight? What do you do? What have you done? Have you had this experience? What happens when somebody challenges something that feels essential? Take it personally. Yeah, right, exactly. You're poking my person. How else am I supposed to take this? Existential FOMO, fear of missing out. Mm, mhm. Yeah, the cares of this world are so deep in me that if I'm honest, I'm just too scared to let go of them sometimes. And yet I know they choke the real life. Yeah. Yeah. We want both, right? I remember for the longest time trying to learn how to pray, which was not easy. For a long time, people come up to me after I taught those years ago, and they'd say, like, look, man, maybe for you it's easy just to like sit quietly and meditate, but it's not for me. And so if you could give me I just need something to do, man. Like, your messages just keep saying, sit quietly and meditate. And I'm like, I tried that. How do I help my marriage? These are very valid questions, but I routinely would say, if I'm giving you the impression that it's easy for me to sit quietly and meditate, I'm not communicating clearly. Indeed it is not. Got a rangy mind. And for years, I remember feeling, I had this little image in my head, and it was like I was approaching this. I could see this little me, and he was coming up to the edge of the void. And for a long time, it freaked me out. So the little me, wasn't really interested in staying there for too long. So I'd start reading a book about meditation or something, listening to a podcast on silence. Just need a little more information. And then I noticed I was doing that, and I thought, well, that's silly. And so I would stand here on the edge of it, this little me I could see in my mind, and I could feel this. You step in, and probably a solid year, what I felt come forward from me was the words yes and no simultaneous to each other. And I realized that I'm like, okay, I'll go in there as long as it's an adventure. If I can if it's like Narnia in there and I can come back and tell my friends about it, then I'm into it. And it's nothing. There's no story. What kind of response have you noticed in yourself when the interpersonal stuff gets tricky, when you felt betrayed or belittled or not heard or ignored? What do you notice in yourself? Could you refill this? Judgment. Thanks. What direction does the judgment go? Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. It's like there's this like some kind of alarm system gets triggered, and pride is like, I'll take it from here. You don't want to have to look at that. That might call the whole thing into question. Don't worry, I got you. Mm. Yeah. 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 Yeah, the old justifier. You guys know that one? I've got my reasons. Sure, that may have not been the best way to handle it, but did you see what they did to me? Like, yeah. Have you ever found yourself telling a story and you're like, okay, so the craziest thing happened to me yesterday. And so now the reason I responded the way that I did was because, and then there's this other reason for the reason that I'm telling you why. And then I got 5 and before you even say what the thing is, you got a layer of 11 different reasons to make it impossible for you to be cross-examined. We got a pretty thorough legal team at work down in here. Thank you. Okay, I gotta get going here, guys. The Pharisees, here they are. Okay, this is a little example of the test administration that they kept giving Jesus. All right, so this is slide 8, I think. Yeah, there it is. So some Pharisees came to Jesus, and they came to test him, and they asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? Problematic question already. Haven't you read, Jesus replied, that at the beginning, the Creator made them male and female, and he said, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother, be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. And so they're no longer two, but they're one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let nobody separate. Case closed. And why then, they asked, did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? So they're like, look, man, the law says this thing that you're saying you're representing, you're misrepresenting it. Why is this in here? And Jesus said, well, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts are hard. But it wasn't this way from the beginning. The Pharisees asked Jesus for a black and white answer to a really complicated and complex question. And they're speaking in laws and labels and categories and traps and tests. And Jesus, at least to my singular delight, responds in poetry. He responds by referencing the Hebrew creation poem. And the primary theme of the creation poem is stated in the opening lines. In the beginning, God. Full stop. Before and beneath anything else is God. Undifferentiated wholeness. The ancient prayer, the Shema, hear, O Israel, the Lord is one. From this undifferentiated wholeness arises the act of creation, which, if you look at it, is the allowance of separateness. It's interesting to me, it's fascinated me for quite a while that the language of creation is passive. It's let there be. It's this allowing. Let there be distinction. Let there be light from darkness. Let the waters above separate from the waters below. Let the dry land separate from the ocean. Let there be day, let there be night. Now, the ancient rabbis taught that matter was actually not indifferent to this process. That the upper waters wept when separated from the lower waters. That darkness longed for intimate connection with the light as it once knew. That light chases after the darkness but can never again catch it. That all created things, the whole order, desires to be one, to be consciously one, as they were, undifferentiated in God. Have you ever heard this before? This is fascinating to me. The creation poem continues with more division. There's the sea creatures and the birds, and then I always like this line, the cattle and the creeping things. The poet writes that each became unique in their own distinctive qualities. Until finally, God created mankind in the image of God. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. It's actually two poems stitched together. The first pass in Genesis, humanity, male and female, appear all at once. And then the second pass, there's a different story. It says, then the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, the ruach, the presence. And the man became a living being. What's the name of that dude? You guys remember? Adam. I got a good pal named Adam, and I was delighted when I learned this. Adam, it's not a name. It means like humankind. And it actually comes from the word for ground, Adamah. So the word Adam is humankind. It's actually closer to dirt man. But it's this linking in essence to the earth from which we're formed, but filled by the breath of God. And in this way, our bodies are the meeting place of the common and the extraordinary, the spirit and matter, the sacred and the meaty. The desire for home and the place where we are most at home, the temple of the Holy Spirit. Even this being the case, the Creator senses that something's missing in this little dirt man. Maybe he's lonely, needs some kind of partnership. And so Eve is created out of the man's rib. Remember that? I'm not sure why. What's up with that rib? And Adam wakes up and he's overjoyed to meet his partner. He says, "This is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh." And then the next line is the one referenced by Jesus. Jesus says, "This is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and the two become one flesh." You know, the culmination of the creation poem isn't what I always thought it was, which is humankind being created in the divine image. The conclusion of the poem, where the poem actually pivots, is in the reversal of the creation pattern. Up to this point, creation was a process of separation, of things that were one becoming two. In humankind, what was two becomes one. And this happens through having the courage to leave behind the known for the unknown, to leave father and mother and familiarity and safety and security and sense of self and a sense of home, and to leave what is known for the unknown, this conscious act of surrender to become one flesh. Flesh has got a bad rap, I feel like, in the scriptures, so I looked into it a little bit. And I learned flesh, it's the same root, basar, flesh. It means messenger of good news. So the two become one messenger of good news. See, our relationships, especially the most intimate ones, are the place that, depending on how we choose to work with them, they're the place where the patterns of fragmentation and separation can be reversed, unlearned, let go of. Where things that felt separate can reclaim their original oneness. And this is why Jesus is so serious about divorce. I'm not trying to talk about divorce this morning. Years ago, Joe, my old comrade, and I were teaching through the Sermon on the Mount, and I felt like I drew the short straw and had to teach about divorce. And I thought, okay, how do I work with this? Because Jesus is pretty aggressive about it, you know? And I'm like, there's got to be a loophole, man, because like it happens to like more than half of us. I'm not going to go up there on a Sunday morning and tell a room with half people who are already grieving the disillusion of the most intimate experience of their life that they're sinning. What is actually happening in this thing? I feel like the point that's being made is in marriage and in intimate partnerships and our closest relationships. Jesus is just saying, like, we need to take really seriously their beginnings and also their endings. And is there a better mirror that you found than the person you let in the closest? Have you ever done what I've often done and just wondered, why do I offer the best parts of myself to the people I see the least and the absolute worst parts of myself to the people I love the most? It doesn't seem right. Jesus says to be really mindful and cautious with how we work with our most intimate relationships, because Because the choice presents itself maybe more often there than anywhere else. To pay attention to the pattern that we're participating in. Are we living the first part of the story of fragmentation and separateness, where I know what I need and I know that you've got it and I need you to give it to me? Just another place to project and take and want and fragment. Or the place where all boundaries can dissolve. We can participate in this new pattern. The whole reason we're here is to wake up from the illusion of separateness, to come home to God again and again and again. The disciples heard this, and I'm pretty sure it was Peter, I bet, who said to him, like, well, if this is the situation between a husband and wife, then it's better not to marry. Literally, that's what he said, actually. This is his response, like, whoa. Oh, Paul? No, yeah, elsewhere Paul says something like that too. Check me on this, Charles. I got Matthew 19:10, one of the disciples. Yeah, Paul says later, he's like, look, man, if you can't get your hormones under control, then just take a wife, which is, I don't know. There's all kinds of stuff in the Bible that I'm like, whoa. That seems like a great reason to marry. Lucky her. Well, if this is the situation, then it's, that seems like a lot of work. It's probably better not to marry. And what Jesus offers one alternative. Do you know what it is? This is literally in the scriptures. He goes, you don't have to do it. You can become a eunuch. When Peter was an old man, he wrote, by God's divine power, we've been given everything that we need to consciously participate in the life of God, these promises that enable us to share in God's divine nature and to escape the world's corruption that's caused by human desires. And so in view of all this, make every effort to respond to God's promises to live. So, what do you think? What are these relationships for? What are we doing forming all these bonds? Are we just social animals, not too far removed from the chimpanzee? Is it just survival mechanisms? Is it loneliness? What's the purpose of marriage? Because it hurts, doesn't it? Even when it's good, it still hurts. And also, it could fall apart at any time. Mm. 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 That's really good. Yeah, Charles says, like, if we're just trying to make the thing work on our own, we're being sort of ridiculous, And that's a very Western model of, this relationship's broken, I'm going to fix it unilaterally. And she'll love it once I'm done fixing it. She can't see it now, but don't worry, babe, I got this. Yeah, right. This is true. Like, it means a lot of different things in different cultures. Like, in a lot of cultures, there's divorce just isn't an option, And in India, they don't have this romantic ideal. And the romantic ideal, I think for a lot of us, is hard to sustain. That's why there's this common phrase, the honeymoon period, That's why it used to drive me crazy when Jess and I were first married. It's like everybody I met was like, wait till the honeymoon phase is over. Oh, yeah, you guys look happy now, but trust me. And I'd be like, no way, because I'm like Peter Pan. I was like, we're going to be happy forever. There's this romantic ideal that's hard to to maintain. A lot of cultures don't even offer that, you just get kind of like assigned your spouse, and you don't even get to see her face until after you marry her. When you die, they throw her on the funeral pyre too. It's kind of intense. A lot of different ways to answer this question, but I am actually posing this as a question. What do you sense to be the purpose of forming these close bonds? Hmm. Hmm. It does. Hmm. 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 Yeah. Um, hmm. Yeah. The healing that can happen in connection with others is like no other. I feel like Misty was mentioning the body, and it's true. Like, and I feel like it's a joke if you work with the text a little bit when Paul's talking about we're a body, and he's like, what if the eye um, just basically gets on an ego trip and was like, man, eyes are the best. This thing didn't have an eye; it wouldn't know where it was going. And then it would really be a mess. Eyes are the coolest, and everything should be an eye. He's like, but what if your wish was granted and the whole body was an eye? You would be a terrifying monster. And it's like in these close relationships, you start to notice, I started to notice that I really wanted to make Jess into an eye like me. And then we'd finally be able to see the thing, and we'd live happily ever after. And it took a long time to learn to appreciate that she hears and sees and has a wisdom I could never begin to touch or to see on my own. And the healing that can happen. Have you ever let your terrible monster out to somebody close to you? And like, I don't know if you're like me. For a while, you're like, served him right. Thanks, buddy. Thanks for always having my back. Anger. And after a while, you're like, whoa, this is not helping anymore. And so you're like, listen, anger, I appreciate that you're trying to protect something in me, but can you try to let me handle this from a different way? And it's like, no, for a while. And can start to feel a little bit embarrassed about some of these parts of ourselves. And I don't know if there's anything as transformative or healing as when somebody you love actually chooses to accept the part of you that you can't accept and begins to teach you how to accept yourself. And, all these 12-step programs keep telling us the same thing. There's no real change before we accept reality as it is, which means even accepting and holding and integrating the parts of ourselves that we're most embarrassed of. This is intimacy. I'd say I'm going to end with this. I think the opposite of control is intimacy. The English word intimacy comes from two Latin roots, intimor, into the fear, and intimus, to the innermost. And it is a fearful thing to look in the mirror of the closest relationships we have. That's a fearful thing because it reveals the truth on one level. But if we don't look away, if we stop turning the energy outward, to changing this or that, to see past the patterns and the programs and the trauma and the hurt, mistakes, the justifications and the victories and all these stories that we have about who we are, to look long enough. What begins to show itself is that there's only this one thing happening. It's Christ is all and is in all. And that the way this oneness is mediated and accessed is through mutual, sustained vulnerability. Back when I first said yes to this job, I was in the habit then, I probably ought to get into it again, of just routinely telling people who were really stoked on this place, like, one of these days I'm going to let you down. I'm going to miss a text, or I'm going to forget to unlock the door. Like, I'm not going to do it on purpose. But I am going to do it. I'm going to say something that offends you because it doesn't line up with the way that you've always understood something. And then when you come to talk to me about it later, I'm not going to have a good enough explanation. Like, it's going to happen. Can we remain friends? Can we try to learn what we can from disappointment? Because disappointment may be our best teacher if we'll listen. All right. Oh my goodness, it's 11:34. All right. Well, thank you guys. Shayla and Kellen, if you want to come up, we'll open the table behind us here. The Eucharist is available to anybody who would like to come and eat. You're welcome to hang out here for as long as you'd like. You should probably pick up your kids if you've got some in the back. I should mention that, we gather in the way that we do, as in, pay rent and have all this kind of lights and heat, air conditioning, by donations from folks like me and you. And so if you'd like to make a financial contribution, that would be greatly appreciated. Stay for as long as you'd like. Leave when you're ready. When you do, do so in the peace of our Lord. Gracias. See you around.
I'm going to sing one more little Native American jam here. This is a Lakota prayer song.